Let's check out this conversation that I just had with my new friend Ley Linder, who's a behavior analyst. He works with people with cognitive disorders and all kinds of stuff. I found this conversation riveting from a self defense application standpoint. There are so many parallels between uh, martial arts and self defense to what he does for a living professionally that I just couldn't get enough of it. So I hope you tune into this, learn some stuff. I know I did, and let's go.
Welcome to the Warrior Mindset Podcast. We are your guide as you make your way through life, getting better 1% every day. We believe that life is lived and true victory won through adversity. Nothing easy is ever worth it. We believe in the warrior ethos and support those that choose to walk that path.
All right, Ley, thank you for joining me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I am beyond flattered to be here today to
appreciate
sit down
it.
and talk with you.
Well, we did a show. I have another podcast that I do at SoCo, the co-work, and we talked. We had one.
Yeah.
You can go listen to that one. I'll link it up. But I was super interested in everything you do, and it hit on some nerves and some things I'd been thinking about, and I thought it was interesting. So, what's some of your background? So, I've got your bio here, and we'll make sure we post it. But tell me what you do. In your own words.
I guess two ways I'll explain it. One is the more, formal dynamic is I'm a behavior analyst and a gerontologist. Formerly, my specialty is the behavioral presentations of neurocognitive disorders in individuals with intellectual disabilities.
It's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. It's a lot of fancy words. In the scope of regular, normal conversation, I help people that are having behavioral issues navigate the areas of life that are problematic to fundamentally improve the quality of their lives. For me, with my business and my day-to-day work, that happens to be individuals that have intellectual disabilities and live in residential group home settings.
Okay.
A lot of the conversation that you and I had last week when we first met formally for the first time was in the space of how to take that formality of the clinical behavioral analysis and apply it to our day-to-day lives. So how do we reconcile and navigate the behavioral presentations of our spouses or our partners or our children or coworkers and kind of unlocking behavior as a language? How do we learn what things mean, whether it's the outward presentation or the subtle things such as facial expressions or observing how people move through their own personal environments. So I know the conversations that you and I had were very intriguing very quickly in the space of applying the clinical behavioral principles to us.
Yes.
As people, not patients.
Right.
Is that
yeah.
That was my takeaway.
It was.
I enjoyed so much of our conversation.
Like how far down that? I mean, I'm pretty sure. I feel pretty certain you went pretty far down the rabbit hole of like interpreting people. I mean, like there's a lot of folks on the internet that will interpret people's body language by watching them while they're in court.
Yes.
Things like that. I mean, how deep down that do you go?
From a more clinical perspective with my day-to-day work, it goes into observational skills. And that's so much of what we do. If you were to open a textbook, even as basic as Psych 101, it's going to get into naturalistic observation, and the idea of observing people in their environment versus a clinical setting, or can you be seen while you're observing somebody? If I was like, well, Gene, I really want to know how all of this podcast equipment works, I'm just going to sit in the corner and watch you.
Right.
That's going to impact your behavior.
I was going to say, I learned that from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, absolutely. But
you can't observe the thing without affecting the thing.
And that's the brilliant part of behavior, is that we assume it's just related to people. Behavior is the actions of any organism. So you can look at cell behavior.
Okay.
What's the guy's name with all the dog training? Caesar.
Yes. Yeah. Caesar Romero or something like that.
The guy.
That's
Yeah,
not that's an older comedian.
Yeah, Caesar Milan.
Mhm.
He's built an entire empire of TV shows and branded
Right.
dog equipment, if you will,
Hmm.
leashes based on the behavior of dogs.
Right.
And that's obviously not using words, but the behavior of dogs.
Yeah, he's just watching how they respond to scenarios.
Absolutely. And they can tell you a lot. Any animal can tell you a lot of what they're thinking or what they're feeling just by observing them. So the idea of observing behavior in, like your example, the courtroom, I think you can tell a lot by people. And when we're working with individuals with intellectual disabilities, to be a good behavior analyst, you have to be able to observe and recognize, but then interpret. Those are two different skills. The idea
like, are they distressed?
Absolutely. And then to recognize what distress means or what it looks like, and then to formulate a theory or a hypothesis on what's causing it, to then provide an intervention to provide support to that distress.
Right. And that's essentially what you do.
Absolutely.
Professionally.
So observing, then analyzing, and then creating some type of intervention to help address the behavior. But that's not different than us making evaluations of walking in the door after work. And, if the easiest one's coming on mind is you walk in the door and your partner's on the couch in tears, what that means. That's probably not the best space to say, well, how was your day?
Yeah, we already kind of know.
Well, we know.
Yeah.
So the observation stuff is such a key component, but I think it's lost both clinically for my work, but it's also lost in the idea of how can we improve our interactions, our day-to-day life by being more observant and recognizing what things mean. Well, there's a language there.
There is. And, what started tripping my brain when we were talking last time was, I teach self-defense. I mean, that's like, why are you here? Why are you on the Warrior Mindset podcast? Right. One of the things that me and my other guests and things we talk about is having empathy to others. Like, this idea of being a leader it's not that you're just like some strong alpha male telling everybody what to do. I mean, a true leader listens. They can read the room.
Yeah.
They know when to do things and when not to do things. I mean, that's leadership, pulling people along instead of pushing people. And then, we teach self-defense. So like, I'd say 90% of that. Most people think self-defense is mostly, kicking and punching and eye gouging and things, but I would say 90% of it is just paying attention.
It's really interesting to hear you, because I was going to ask you to define the different, like what is it, the fundamental principles of self-defense, because that's not a space that I'm familiar with personally or professionally. But what you just described is very much what we teach people that are going through orientation training of how to manage aggressive behaviors in hospitals or in group homes. And I would say probably 90% of it has nothing to do with touching people.
Right.
Which is the antithesis of what I was saying on the podcast the other day.
I want to talk about that too.
To touch people. But I frequently tell people that if you're engaged with someone that is agitated or upset or aggressive, the last thing you want to do is probably put your hands on them, because it's inherently it's an aggressive action.
Yeah.
And I can think of the times in my day-to-day life when I'm upset. Hugs are not what I'm looking for. It's like I need space.
That's right.
But knowing when to engage in the appropriate action, I would think would be so much of what the fundamental lessons of self-defense would be. Is the last thing we want to do is to have to engage someone physically.
That's right.
And there's probably a litany of strategies that lead up to that last resort.
100%.
And so much of it, I would assume, would be rooted in recognizing the other person's behavior, but being able to control your own.
100%.
I say all the time in crisis management situations is how we would refer to them, is you have to demonstrate the behavior that you want. And if you and I are both in a seated position, but if I were to stand up and walk over and stand over you,
Yeah, I would
that's
not.
an inherently aggressive
Yeah,
action on
be a
my
weird
part.
podcast.
It'd be a very weird podcast. And then you'd stand up and I go,
What are we doing?
Yeah, this is on.
Well,
But sitting down is
100%.
much more, you're demonstrating what you want to see.
100%. Since we're talking about it, one of the things we teach is, this isn't something I invented, but we teach what we call, I say we, the industry in general, good instructors, we call nonviolent posture. So whenever you're, things are getting heated, wherever the easy scenarios, you're in a bar and somebody bumps you or whatever, or you bump someone. If they are in a bladed position, meaning one leg's in front of the other, and their hands are up or their fists are clenched. I mean, you don't even need to see it to understand what signal they're sending you. Yeah. So we train to, be able to respond, our feet together, soft, but our hands out in front, and kind of looks passive, but there's also, there's some defense there. That's like that. One of the teachers I had, Tony Blauer, he teaches use the airbag, which is your hands, right? So you're creating that space, but that sends that message that
I'm not a threat.
I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat. And then, from there we have different things like that. But also, I don't know if you find this interesting or not, but also it's for the public watching you. Right? Because if you're a martial artist or you're a fighter or whatever, and somebody aggresses you and you deal with it, in that way, well, what does that look like to, witnesses? Are you the aggressor? At what point do you become the aggressor? So we also teach that for that reason too, because, when someone's explaining it to the cops later, well, that guy stood up and then the other guy just took him out.
Yeah.
They're going to probably haul you off, or you're at least going to be answering questions for a while.
Yeah, and it's such a unique perception or perspective of it, in the sense that when we're talking about de-escalation and in our environment, we're trying, that's the goal.
Constant de-escalation.
Constant.
Yeah.
Like we've almost failed if it gets to an aggressive standpoint.
Probably.
Yeah. And sometimes it's unpreventable. But the idea of what it looks like to the people around is really important. I use the analogy a lot in trainings that I do, which I don't know why I'm surprised by it. I just never thought about it. What I'm hearing you say is so similar to what we train on. It's just in a slightly different lens and a slightly different application.
The results are different. Maybe.
But I've used the analogy sometimes that when we have crisis management situations that are aggressive in nature, on the outside looking in, it almost looks like a high school fight in a cafeteria.
I'm sure.
Because everyone just descends.
Oh, man, I bet.
That makes everything worse. And I try to train staff, like less is more. We don't need 8 people trying to engage. You said nonviolent stances.
Yes.
We call it nonviolent crisis intervention.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's what we refer to it as.
You could probably call self-defense that too.
I'm sure if there's any healthcare professionals out there, they're probably, oh, he's talking about CPI. And that's like one of the brands, if you will. But the outside perception of that is very interesting to me, because I've never thought of it in that dynamic of how, whether it's other residents or patients or clients that we're working with, how they're perceiving it, but also how other staff in the settings we're working in are perceiving the actions of the two people that are interacting. Right,
because you still want to work with them.
Absolutely.
I mean, even from a professional standpoint, you want to keep working in that environment.
Yeah.
You can't demonstrate, emotion or whatever in a way where they're like, well, that person's probably kind of dangerous to be with these people. You don't want that.
Absolutely. And from anyone that's engaged, you don't want that. That will be rattling around my brain.
Okay.
Well past the end of this podcast.
Well, you had a story last time you talked about I forget his name, but it was someone you hired and you were like, I know he's the right guy.
It was Nick.
Yeah. Nick. Okay. Yeah. Can you just tell me that story again? Because I think it's relevant to where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give a brief background for the audience, I own a small business that provides behavioral health services, and we're very fortunate to be growing. We've been growing for several years, and it's
Yeah.
great. We get to help more people.
Yeah.
Well, I was at a point where the business had grown. I was drowning like most small business owners do.
Yes.
It ebbs and flows
Yes.
when we're lucky enough to have
Yep.
it do that. And I hired Nick during COVID. And so because we work in congregate living settings, we work in large day program settings in healthcare
Mhm.
as well. We weren't on site. And so the story takes place one of the first times Nick went on site after I'd hired him.
Okay.
So everything we've been doing was largely paperwork and discussion.
Right. He's kind of unproven at this point, I would say.
Yeah, in the space of
Yeah.
him and I working together.
Right. Sure.
And we walk into this day program setting that had roughly 100 adults with intellectual disabilities in a warehouse. It's loud.
In a warehouse.
It's like a warehouse. Like
Okay.
it'd be like going to, I don't know what would be a good example, but it's be like a back of a PetSmart.
Okay.
Where it's like super high ceilings.
Yeah, loud.
Loud.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on,
Mhm.
and you got people on all the continuum of intellectual disabilities.
Right.
And this gentleman that was the resident in the story had autism. So sensory issues were a major issue. Loud,
Mhm.
overstimulation. So we're sitting there when this guy had just been admitted that day. It was his first day attending the day program from home. So he lived with his family, came there during the day, and was not going well. I was talking to the day program director, and Nick's standing beside me for a few minutes and talking to her. And I turn around and Nick is gone. I just don't know where he's at. And that would have been was a big problem immediately because
did he take off?
Yeah, like where did he go? Like this
You're
was
like,
going
"Shit,
great.
just
Yeah,
got him here."
it was not great
Yeah.
feeling turning around and he was gone.
Right.
But then I found him, and he was across the room and was sitting next to a man that was 6'2", 225, autistic,
Big dude. Yeah.
nonverbal, cannot tell anybody what's wrong. And he is sitting Indian style against a cinder block wall and is rocking feverishly against it. To the point that I legitimately thought that if he hit his head against that wall, it was going to split open like a cantaloupe.
Right.
So I see this, and I'm looking for medical assistance. I'm looking for a nurse.
Yeah.
Let's call 911. Like, this is going to be a problem sooner than later.
Let's get ahead of this.
Exactly. And when I turn around, Nick is over there with this man. He hadn't left. He'd gone over to him and put his arm around him and was helping him. And by the time I got over there, Nick had him standing up and was walking out of the main area of this warehouse. But Nick knew what was wrong. All of the previous work experience, for us working on paperwork, he knew that the problem with this man was that he was overstimulated. It was this man's reaction to his environment was negative, and what was going to help him was getting out of that. And Nick went over and comforted him, got him up, got him out, and the guy pretty quickly calmed down. But to our earlier point earlier, what was so poignant about that was that Nick was able to observe what was going on, assess and evaluate and analyze what he believed was the problem, and then provided an intervention to it that in some settings could have easily led to that man being physically restrained.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in any situation when restraining people, there's an inherent danger. You can look at the news
100%.
in regards to what happens when people get put in prone positions. That happens in healthcare sometimes with behavioral issues. That could have led to that. It could have led to this man being taken to the hospital and injected
Who
with
knows?
medicines to calm him
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
which are interventions that are sometimes necessary, but they weren't in this case. Nick was able to kind of, as our informal model that we've kind of created just by talking, he observed, he evaluated, and then he intervened.
Yeah.
And he did all of it with just putting his arm around him.
Hmm.
It was you used the word empathetic a minute ago, and
Mhm.
it's the perfect word.
Yeah.
It's empathy.
That's awesome.
It's being able to put yourself in that person's shoes and meet them where they are. And then you said earlier, pull them.
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of what Nick did that day. Was he met that gentleman in his reality, at his place of need, and then walked him back to ours,
That's cool.
to the safe one.
That's cool.
And that's what he did.
That's
And
very
that's
cool.
really what he did. And that's a great example, because it's, that's a big dude, and he's aggressive and he's hurting himself. But we could apply those principles to so many things throughout our day-to-day lives,
man.
and particularly in the space of your work with self-defense and all that. I don't think there's a big leap there. It sounds incredibly parallel to me.
Yeah, I think so. And, well, I do have, so that's a pretty high level crisis management, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You kind of headed off a situation before it became something else. What's one of the things? I mean, you hired this guy, but like, what led you to seeing that in him in the first place? I mean, how do you, or in yourself? Like, I don't know what question I'm asking necessarily, and except that you entered that room, you kind of took stock of everything, and then you're like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. Like, how do you come to that point in a crisis? Because clearly there's a crisis going on. I mean, the
Yeah.
guy's wigging out. Like,
Yeah, I don't know that I have a specific answer for you, other than experience
mhm,
and repetition.
okay,
The idea of doing it over and over again, where you've seen that prior to Nick's work with us, and we work exclusively with adults with intellectual
Yeah.
disabilities. Prior to that, Nick's experience was working with children
okay,
with intellectual disabilities, primarily autism. So
okay,
he didn't come to us with no repetition. He didn't come to us with no experience. He came to us with no repetition or experience with adults, but the fundamental principles
principles are all the same.
were the same. So my cousin is a entrepreneur, small business owner, and works nothing close to healthcare in the space. But he made a comment to me the other day that he was training an employee that is fantastic for him. It's really kind of pivoted and revolutionized his business in many ways. But what he said to his employee was, please accept my apology in advance if I get frustrated with you about
Yeah.
engaging in the job. I've done this.
Yeah.
I have 50,000 reps
Yeah.
doing this. I can do it in my sleep. I can tell you by the sound of what's happening, whether or not it's right or not.
Right.
And I think that would be how I answered your question.
Yeah.
Is it's repetition, it's practice. But I think that, again,
It's right there. Self-defense, man. That's what I'm like, you guys just have to, it's not sexy. It's not amazing. You're gonna have to do the same thing over and over for 4 or 5 classes in a row.
But isn't that what makes,
And that's how you get good.
that's how you get good. You took the words out of my mouth. That's what makes experts.
Yeah.
That's what separates me from a student at Carolina right now.
That's what separates masters from
exactly
intermediates, honestly.
The ability and the desire to engage in the same behavior over
That's right.
and over and over
Is
again.
it Bruce Lee? There's a Bruce Lee quote where he says, I do not fear the man that's practiced 10,000 kicks one time, but I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm truly scared of the man that's practiced one kick 10,000 times.
It's
bingo.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're saying it. If you're one of my students and you're listening, we just need to practice more.
I mean, that goes to sports.
Yeah, it does.
It goes to, I was talking to a guy here at SoCo the other day that he had developed this insane like code. He wrote his own code for this program to help with his business and all this stuff. And I'm like, it would take me years to do it, to
Yeah.
figure that out.
Right.
But the reality is he had done those basic skills
Yeah.
so many thousands of times
Yeah.
that
He's
he
able
has
to
the
just lay it out.
expertise to create it for his business. So I think that's what helped Nick that day, was that, yes, it was a high level crisis management that we were able to fend off at the pass, so to speak, but it was a level of repetition and expertise that Nick brought to the table. And to answer one of your other questions, that's how I knew that he had a fundamental skill set that he possessed at his other jobs that I could take and generalize or build upon to improve his level of expertise. And Nick has gotten to a point where he is very close to being able to formally, with the credentials, call himself an expert.
Oh, wow.
But the expertise goes beyond the book.
Yeah, 100%.
And the application.
Yeah, it always does.
Always does.
This is kind of a side tangent, I guess, but through all of this, we're talking about touch a lot, like touching other humans. That's a different podcast.
Yeah.
But like just, working with people, I work in that, not the same realm you do, but I do touch people a lot.
Yeah.
God, that sounds terrible.
Doesn't it? At least you're not saying you touch people with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah.
You can edit that out.
That's even worse. This is not a P. Diddy moment here.
No.
But like you are, I mean, the result might be that I throw them on the ground, or like I'm blocking something, or I'm locking up an arm or something like that. But it took me a while when I first transitioned from student to teacher. It took me a while to get over myself touching people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Did you find any of that? I mean, I know your story is a little different because we covered some of this in the last podcast, but you were raised in the environment. Your parents, like, tell.
Yeah. So my parents and my sister, my whole family works in this field and works with people with intellectual disabilities. I grew up from a very young age being around people with intellectual disabilities. So my comfort level, I remember you asking me this last week, how did I feel about that? Because it's abnormal. That's not most people's experience.
Yeah.
And for me, it was normal. So the level of comfort was much different. I think that asking someone, perhaps Nick, how he navigated the comfort level of not having the same experience as a kid that I did, because it was normal to grow up and be sitting at a dinner table and have someone beside you that had intellectual disabilities, or going to work over the summer, so to speak, with your dad, and that's where you went. It's what you do. I think when I hear you talk about the idea that you're interacting with people in a physical manner, I think for me the experience was twofold. I had to trust myself that it was okay for me to interact with somebody through physical touch or tactile dynamics. When I work with folks that are more profoundly intellectually disabled, one of my go-to approaches to developing rapport with them are hand massages. So I'll sit down next to a person on a couch or at a table, and I'll grab their arm and start at their fingers, work up to their elbows, and then come back down. And for people in that setting, tactile stimulation is incredibly rare. The only time that they're engaged in any type of physical touch with another person is generally when that person's providing some level of direct care assistance to them, helping them bathe, helping them dress, feeding them.
Right.
Things that would be inherently
very clinical.
Yeah. But also they would be very difficult for that person to engage in. Imagine if someone was.
Yeah, you're not having a conversation while someone's feeding you or
one of our training things that we tell people to do that.
Yeah.
Tell them what you're doing. Tell them how long it's going to take. If someone was going to physically manipulate your body to put your pants on, it could be uncomfortable.
Especially if you don't know what the hell's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or if you are paraplegic or quadriplegic, and you need to
You can't even feel it.
you can't
Right.
feel it, but they're still manipulating your body. Or
Mm.
you need a Hoyer lift, which is a fancy term for a lift that gets you out of one seat and can
Okay.
put you in another. That's uncomfortable. But I've been in healthcare settings where they will transfer someone from their bed to a Hoyer lift and then wheel them down the hallway nude.
Mhm.
It's cold.
Yeah.
That's touch. That's tactile stimulation. But recognizing that. But if that's the only time people were interacting with you
Yeah,
from a
it's
physical,
not-
it's
not
not,
gonna- yeah.
it's not great. But to go back to the trust dynamic, I've found success with those specific population of people that if I sit down with them and I'm massaging their hands, it feels good. It's a different tactile stimulation
Right.
to them. I can't sit down to them and say, "My name's Lee. I've got all these degrees. I got all
Yeah,
this
they don't
stuff."
care.
They don't care.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
can't even comprehend it.
Right.
But if I can touch them and it doesn't hurt, if I can touch them and it feels good,
Mm.
I can create a level of trust, in my opinion, that allows me to sit down next to them.
Right.
And one of the things that I enjoyed about talking last week was the idea of identifying people as humans and seeing past diagnoses and diseases.
Yeah.
And to me, the power of touch this is an example of it, where you can provide some level of trust. But for me, I had to trust myself enough to be able to go do that it was okay to give someone a hand massage. And
Right,
it is
'cause-
impactful. But I would assume that when I hear you say that you struggle going from student to teacher, some of it, when you're touching people, because you're getting in people's body space.
Mhm.
I took one karate class in
Oh.
5th grade. But when you're
Yeah.
modeling the behavior, you're
Yes.
touching people in places that they're not used to being touched
That's right.
in by a teacher.
Yeah, it's inherently scary too because they know this is like I'm going to end up on the floor
Yeah,
here in
yeah.
about 3
Like,
seconds. so-
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think there's a level of trust that I had to have in myself
Yeah.
that I'm assuming that you
100%.
had to develop.
Yeah.
But that person that you're working with, whether it's through your work or my work, they have to trust back.
Mm.
And I think that before you can break down that barrier, there's got to be that mutual trust between you and the person, but you also have that trust with yourself. And that's probably one thing that's been a difference maker for me, is developing that within myself, where it's tough to go touch somebody.
Yeah, it is. I see it in students too. So 2 types of martial arts that we practice in the gym. One is like karate, like kickboxing
Yeah.
or whatever. And then there's jujitsu, which is
Okay.
very hands-on, like literally rolling on the floor with someone, like wrestling. Very different.
Yeah.
But there's levels of trust that you can notice the students developing between each other, because if they're striking each other, that's a pretty scary thing.
Yeah.
And you have to learn that, well, this person's, when we're doing this to get better, I can trust this person. They're not going to like wildly do anything on purpose, vice versa. And then in the jujitsu part, where like it just feels weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can be in someone's guard, which is literally, your legs are open and you wrap your legs around their waist.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the first time you've done that in that setting, it feels really weird. And you have to get over that aspect
Absolutely.
of it.
I think I don't know what the difference between qualifying trust and respect is within this conversation.
they're kind of the same
but
thing.
it seems very
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah.
When I hear you speak
Yeah.
about your students, you'd have to have a level of respect for them
Mm-hmm.
when you were engaged with them.
That's right. I've had instructors that just, threw everyone around and just beat them up. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
don't last too long there. I'm gonna head out. This sucks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that would not be an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, wouldn't last very long. Wouldn't have students, but somehow they have students. I don't know.
But that whole notion of trust and respect,
I like that.
within yourself, but also the idea of I think that people can sense that, whether they're
I think so.
Students looking to, whether it's,
Mm-hmm.
but my perception of martial arts and self-defense has always been, there's the physical nature of it that you see and
Mhm.
observe, but then there's so much of it that the real impact's probably internal, where it's the individual not what you or I could measure
100%.
by, they did this move to this degree of accuracy, that it would be so much internal of what was happening that when you said, I forget the percentage you used, but it was like 80% is,
I would think so.
pre-engagement.
Yeah.
I would think so much of that is occurring within the individual. And
It is.
It's internal.
It is. It is. I mean, that's like the number one way to defend yourself is to not be there.
That's pretty good advice.
It seems pretty simple, but like, don't be there. So we talked a little bit about that. Like you said, it's you and your brother, I think, or is your friend? I think it was your brother. You have a brother?
I have a sister.
A sister. I don't know who you were talking about. I don't remember. I have a bad memory apparently, but you were saying how you'll enter a room.
Yep.
And like you're reading everyone, you're like paying attention to like certain things.
This is you and I talking.
Okay, it was after the show.
Yeah, close. It's my cousin.
Cousin.
He would be also the one I was talking about. I was saying with the business. He would be a phenomenal behavior analyst because his observational skills are second to none. I would actually say my observational skills come almost why they are refined or because I've watched him.
Oh, wow.
One of the fun story or cool story is about him in the observational dynamic is me, Mark is his name, and a good friend of ours, JD. The three of us went to Madrid in February of 2020 to watch a Champions League match, which is like the highest level of soccer.
Yeah.
It's Atletico Madrid versus Liverpool.
Okay.
Happened to be a super spreader event, so I apologize for coming back in February of 2020.
We didn't. Oh, in February.
No, we didn't. We did 9 days after we got back, and they shut down Spain. But
the same thing happened to me in New Orleans.
You were in New Orleans?
Do you remember New Orleans? They were like, New Orleans is like, it's like the number one hotbed in America right now, the end of February or whatever. I'd just been there. It's like, well, I guess I shouldn't go anywhere.
Except for Soko and the grocery store.
Everywhere I went, yes.
But we're on a train on the way to the match.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty observant of Mark. We can communicate fairly well. By most standards, very well, non-verbally in restaurants and bars. That's
cool.
Airports. I don't really have to worry about what Mark's thinking or what he's doing. I can just watch him. While we're standing on this train and it's super crowded, it's a subway in Madrid going to arguably the biggest match of the season. It's packed.
Yeah.
Something's not right about Mark. He's not paying attention. He's very engaging. And he's just not attuned to JD and I. And I can't figure out what he's watching. But all of a sudden, I see him leap like probably 3 to 4 paces across this crowded subway. And he grabs this man's wrist. And he yanks it up. And the man he's a pickpocket.
Oh, man.
And he had reached into... I just remember her accent. She would appear to be an English lady and her husband, and he had reached into her pocket and snatched it.
And Mark just caught him.
Mark not only caught him, Mark caught the trio. He had picked up on the woman that was sitting on the bench.
Distracting them.
She was the orchestrator.
Okay.
And then there was a man to her right and a man to her left at either end of the train, and she was directing them on where to go through nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
Because she was sitting lower.
They were very well practiced.
Very well.
Yeah.
And there was a trio of them. And Mark picked up on all of it because of his observation skills. And he did it, obviously a massive commotion. The next stop, like the people throw the man that his army grabbed off the train, but the other 2 people got up and left too. But no one else picked up on those other 2 people. By this point, I'd figured out where the 3 of them were. And I was like, hey, man, that's a really cool story. But you do realize that they're going to get on at the next stop and shank us.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. We're in Spain, bro.
We are done.
Yeah.
And the craziest thing was we left the match that night. They were standing on the train platform.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a great...
Did they remember you?
Oh,
Oh,
they
yeah?
were definitely
Oh, they were
honestly.
like,
Like three guys from South Carolina and Spain.
Yeah.
We stood out a little
Yeah.
bit.
hey, y'all.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? You guys, but it to the point of observation.
Yeah.
That's how keen he is.
Mm-hmm.
But that those same types of observational skills where you walk into a bar and I could pretty much tell you where people are, how they're moving, almost as it's like a game to me to almost try to like figure out how it's moving around. But to the earlier point of the repetition and to become a master,
I was going to ask you,
it's just over and over and over again. And
do you have any technique? Anything you could share?
I don't know that it's funny you asked that because through like more formal education, I'll get in spaces and continuing to learn, be like, oh, that's what you call that.
That's what I do. Okay.
Yeah, you're like, I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So
Well,
no, I think the thing I would say is I test myself sometimes.
Okay.
So if I'm like sitting at a bar, I'd be like, how many people are still sitting here? And so it's just it just turned it into a game.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, there's 6 people down the left side. I know my back's to it. I've seen the waitress walk in there twice, but it's spaced out.
Yeah.
But I worked in restaurants as well for a little while, so
you're
I know
also heightened.
I know the flow of
Right.
them. But I don't like crowds. I'm pretty averse to them at this point.
Most people that pay attention to this kind of stuff naturally, or I guess professionally, they don't like
Both.
crowds.
Yeah.
Like I have a lot of friends who are like police officers or like combat veterans and stuff. They don't like crowds.
Yeah.
But it's not for, you think, oh, it's some kind of PTSD thing. I guess partly, but also they just don't. They're like I said, the best self-defense is to not be there. So they're like, I ain't gonna be in the middle of this.
Absolutely. And in the spirit of sharing interesting stories, you said one to me the other day in the space of military personnel and how they were trained to perceive threats. I thought that was so illuminating in the space of the way that I conceptualized what you said was looking at what's absent.
Yeah.
We always try to focus on what's there, as opposed to really sometimes what we really need to see is what isn't there.
That's right.
What's missing here.
That's right. That was the story about I forget the book now. Something violence. I don't know, whatever. But like embracing violence or something. I don't remember the name of the book, but I'll link it up. We can do that later. They were talking about training Marines in Afghanistan, Iraq, maybe both or whatever, and they were getting a lot of heavy casualties from their Marines and stuff. And they had done training and they taught the Marines to look for things that stand out. You know what I mean? Like, you go to your training and you're like, look for the person that looks angry or the person that's got a gun or the things, things that here, if you walked outside of, the office here and someone was like, they look mean, or maybe they had a rifle, I mean, like whatever, they would stand out. But what they found was that everybody hated the Marines.
Yeah.
So they were all kind of like angry and yelling or whatever. And most of them were armed or whatever. But it was the one dude who was like nice, who was just standing there quiet, not doing anything. That was the dude that was going to cause the most damage. Yeah. So they had to sort of not just do what was written on paper, but actually practice the art of paying attention to what's not the same.
Absolutely.
And that's so hard to do when you have expectations. Like, I think we all have expectations. When I walk into a bar, I have expectations of the way people are going to be acting. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that's not always. Yeah, that's not always the thing. I mean,
or airports.
Yeah, there you
go. Train stations, as an example.
Or subways.
Subways. Yeah, it's and you're right. That is such a hard thing to master. Is the idea of attuning to the absent, attuning to what the perception would be, or our expectations. I love that word.
Yeah,
is that this is the normal. Mm-hmm. In your example, this is what we would expect someone to do in a market, is to look unassuming,
right?
But that's actually what's different, and that's what the problem
is. The military or ex-military world, they have this concept called the gray man.
Mhm.
I don't know if you ever see that. So it's the idea that you're the gray man, right? So you're the person that can be in the room and observe everyone, but you're unobservable.
Okay.
What's funny is they always it goes along what we're talking about a little bit, but they always show this person in movies or TV. They're like black shirt, black hat, sunglasses, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, you stand out.
Yeah.
No one else in the room is wearing all black and wearing sunglasses. Like you're not
Yeah.
the gray man anymore. To be the true gray man, you need to dress like a dad, or just very unassuming. You wouldn't.
Absolutely.
But it goes to the point of like learning to pay attention to things that maybe don't stand out, but aren't necessarily like everything else.
Yeah, and those observational skills are, in my world, to bring it back to like the clinical
Mhm.
dynamic, no one has ever taught me
Yeah. Okay.
how to observe somebody.
Okay.
Now they'll say, "Oh, we're going to put you in this room with one-way glass, and then you can observe so
Yeah.
that you're not impacting the environment."
Mm.
Or they'll give you like these fancy sheets, and there's a billion ways to
Yeah.
conceptualize it.
Yeah.
You're just writing down stuff. That's not really observation.
That's like street smarts versus book smarts. You know what I mean?
It's a great analogy.
different.
And I think that there's a level of innateness to it.
Yeah, I think so.
But there's also a dynamic where if you enjoy something for whatever reason, you talk about things that don't sound right. I enjoy observing people. But
creep,
exactly. But I think that it's really interesting stuff, and it's
you're always practicing.
I'm always practicing, and I think that's the fundamental difference is that what makes it book smarts versus street smarts versus an expertise or a master's.
I like that you keep hitting on that. It's just do the reps, man. Do the
always
reps.
Practicing, and it's
get the reps.
What's that saying? Like embrace the process.
Yeah,
it's like this is it. Like this is my thing, and I'm here for it.
I need to work on it.
But it's great when your cousin is like naturally, and it's like one of your best friends in the whole world.
Some people just have talent.
Yeah, and like we enjoy talking about it, so it's just nice. Cool. It blends in that space. So it's.
Let me ask you this. So I'm curious to see if you have this in your profession. When we teach self-defense, I say we like I'm part of some self-defense cabal. When I teach self-defense, one of the things that I try to get through to everyone is the concept of training bias.
Okay.
So if you're a boxer, it's like to a carpenter, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
So if you're a boxer, your answer in self-defense is always going to be to throw hands.
Okay.
If you're a wrestler, your answer is always going to be to try to take someone down, right? But we don't want training bias when it comes to a real self-defense situation. We want to, because there's no rules. It's not like if person does this, then you do that. If they do this, then you do that. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been in enough professional situations to know that the way that shit's written down in a book is not how it goes down in real life. Do you encounter anything like that, training bias, or your employees? You have to kind of coach through that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you gave me a name for it.
Oh,
because again, like I just said, there's things that happen and you're like, I don't know what.
I love it.
I don't know what the name of this is. I would training bias, the concept, yes. Yeah, absolutely it occurs. Yeah. And the way that it occurs in my work is through interventions. What are what is it that we're doing?
He's presenting this, do A, B, and C.
Absolutely.
Well, and might not work.
It drives me absolutely insane. And people
we're the same that way.
Yes. And people ask me all the time, and Lee, what's different between your work as a behavior analyst and all of these other people? And when I Google behavioral analysis or applied behavioral analysis, what's the difference? It's that. It's the training bias that you're honing on. Behavior analysts are given, to use the tool analogy, the carpenter analogy, a toolbox.
Yeah.
And they're told, this solves everything.
Right.
It doesn't solve shit. It solves these specific problems under these specific conditions and these specific people. What we do is we have we open our eyes, which sounds a little condescending, but we are open and we are inclusive of other opportunities to help solve the problems, as
dig it.
opposed to being exclusive to these.
Right.
And the way that we do it is when I first introduced myself, I said I'm an expert in the neurocognitive behaviors. What I'm really an expert in is the behavioral presentation of undiagnosed medical conditions.
Got you.
They happen to be neuro is like my nerd out area. Seizures,
Sure.
dementia, Parkinson's. But when you open up the realm of saying there's another possibility to explain why this behavior is happening, you no longer need the toolbox that was given to you in the book. You have a whole other repertoire of things that could help solve that problem. So when I go, well, the problem for this, the underlying cause of this problem behavior could be an undiagnosed urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
Not psychosis related to the cognitive status changes.
Yeah.
I'm able to then open up the repertoire of solutions to say, let's go to a doctor.
Yeah. Solve. Yeah.
Because a hammer and nail isn't the answer to UTI, which is what we were trained. We were trained that aggressive behaviors related to from the pain of the UTI should be managed through this intervention. The reality is that's not the cause.
Let's just get them in the car and fix their problem.
But it's training bias.
Yeah.
There's a bias in the training that we perceive that what we're experts in is the solution to the problem. And we see it every single day in our work.
I see it in every single self-defense video on YouTube,
which is crazy. Again, I will walk away from this.
That's why I wanted to talk to you, man. There's so many parallels.
I haven't found one impediment that's different. But absolutely,
it's all human behavior.
Training bias. I will go and look at that and see if there's I'm
curious,
a medical or healthcare dynamic.
I'm surprised we didn't steal it from there.
I mean, why reinvent the wheel? You know, if you've got it. I wrote hopefully about 30 minutes in finishing it, but an article on treatment overshadowing in intellectual disabilities. And it's similar to this in the sense that what the definition of that would be, and it doesn't necessarily be intellectual disabilities, but that whatever the treatment is for the condition, that the person doesn't get it because the perception is that they can't engage in it. So the easy example is with intellectual disabilities. If you were depressed and you were receiving an antidepressant, but you also would needed therapy, someone with intellectual disabilities may not have access to the therapy because the perception is they can't engage in it.
Right.
But that's the same type of bias there where you're saying, hey, our hammer and nail isn't going to work for you. But the reality is if you can take that idea or that need, shave off a corner, glue something on, say, hey, you're going to paint the certain color and then give it to them, we can create and be innovative to provide novel solutions to a lot of the problems. So when I hear the training bias, absolutely. But then I'm also going, oh, well, there's also this other overshadowing bias that happens as well. That's
well, that happens too. I mean, and from an instructor standpoint, if you've gone your entire career as an instructor and never, I would say another term we use is pressure test. Pressure test your techniques. And I don't mean go find a person in the wild and beat them up. What I mean is train as close to a real scenario as you can. With full acting and everything. But if you haven't pressure tested your techniques, you will continue to teach your techniques as if they are the gospel.
Absolutely.
Right. So this always works. And that always bothered me because I'm standing here saying this always works. And I'm like, well, I've never actually tried to make it work. So how can I say that? So it seems like a big overshadowing of me telling you this, and it only takes one pretty good student to just go, really? Will it work? Make it work on me, You're like, oh, and then it's a whole different world of like, well, I can't. So what do I do now?
Well, that happens with us all the time. It goes from theoretical hypothesis of, hey, this is what we think we should do. And all of a sudden, I mean, it happens routinely. Well, staff will look at us and go, what would you do? Or how would you do it? And that's how I tell our staff and train folks is you need to be able to say, this is what I would do if I was in that situation.
Yeah.
We were laughing the other day about the idea of parenting and that I'm not a parent. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I have a very close friend of mine. She is brilliant. She has a PhD in school psychology, and she's worked in hospitals. She's worked in school systems and private practice. There's a brilliant mind. And I remember her saying one time, and she worked with kids.
Okay.
And I remember her saying one time, we were probably having a beer somewhere. And so I won't hold her to the statement, given the setting of the comment.
Given the beer.
But I remember her saying, as soon as I was a parent, I threw all that shit out the window.
Yeah, you kind of do.
Because you're going, wait, everything that I was telling them and advising them, I'm not doing.
Yeah.
Because of this, and this.
Yeah.
These additional factors didn't play. So the same thing happens with what we do with our work is it all sounds great.
Yeah.
And what people don't read about behavior analysts is that we write a tremendous amount.
Okay.
That should be like the number one question.
It's writing.
Is like, how do you feel about writing? I don't like it. Great. You did another job.
Yeah, you're not going to.
We write a ton.
Okay.
But we could write these amazing programs and we could train and be the best trainers in the
Yeah.
world. But if it comes down to someone going, that shit don't work, man.
Yeah. What do we do?
What do we do?
Yeah.
And that probably cycles back to that trust dynamic.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Where like, hey, is this actually going to be beneficial to me? Is there a value? And when you talk about like the pressure testing and stuff like that, like I think for our space as clinicians, we have to, the way that we do that is we have to continually be willing to say there's a better way.
Yeah, or this isn't working. We're going to try a different angle.
And
they call it practicing medicine, right?
Yeah. And to your audience, I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But we are healthcare professionals. We are clinicians, but you do practice.
You practice.
And I said this to Nick the other day, the story earlier. He's finishing the formal training.
Gotcha.
And part of that training is that he works very closely with me. He works alongside me. And I know that one of the things he wants the most as he's getting past that formal diamond is he wants the independence and the autonomy to work. I get it. It's one of the things I love most about my job is that I have that ability.
That's why you started your business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So he had written a program and I gave him some feedback. And what I said in the email back in the feedback with the feedback was, we never quit learning, man. Like you've almost now gotten the credentials that allow you to learn the real shit. Because
you know what? So I'm a black belt.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a 4th degree black belt. What we teach, if you're a martial artist, any kind of worth your salt, when you get to the people, if I say black belt, you probably think that's the penultimate level.
Yeah,
it's not. Black belt means you can now begin to learn.
Really?
You have learned the basics. Now you can begin to learn how to use them.
Really?
That's what it means.
I always assumed it was the mastery.
You would think that, but no. Mm-mm.
Really?
Yep. So
that's, again, a parallel.
I love it.
But that's exactly what I told him. I was like, this is like when it really starts. And you said earlier in regards to the book learning, he's done with the book learning.
Now it's time to practice.
Now it's time to learn the real shit because the books.
Yeah. You got to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
Like you can't start from ground zero and just know all the stuff.
And you can't be an expert the first day. It's the repetition, but I couldn't even tell you where the books from either one of my graduate programs are. I don't want to call them useless because that devalues the process.
Yes, it's very important to be where you are now to go through those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay, man.
Yeah.
You've eclipsed this, but like this is the exciting part because now we can do some real shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's fun.
You wouldn't even be able to appreciate how exciting it is if you hadn't gone through that book process either. Though.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know, that's really cool. That's that black belt is the beginning of the education.
That's right.
Not
Yeah.
the mastery
Yeah.
of it.
Up until then, we're just testing to see if you remember the basic shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you were, oh,
That's really cool.
you remember the basic stuff. So now we can actually start applying this and we can have some fun.
Cool. So you said 4th degree.
Yeah.
How many
degree.
degrees are there?
Well, generally speaking, there's 10.
Okay.
10 degrees in black belt.
And I'm assuming that to ascend or to get to the next stage is a lifetime of work.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
I've been practicing martial arts, I would say, my whole life. Took a giant break from teenage years, being a complete dick, to getting through college and having a family. But
I had that same break.
Yeah, most of us took that break. But I've been practicing seriously as an adult for going on 15. So it takes a while.
But I think that goes to the fundamental dynamic of the repetition and the training.
100%.
Is that it's not a job for me. It's a passion. This is a hobby.
Mm-hmm. It's all of it.
I've told my
it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. And I've told my therapist, and I have no problem saying that it's changed my life, and don't think there's no one out there that it can benefit the idea of talking to an unbiased person.
We talk about therapy all the time. Absolutely. On this show.
And I remember him telling me one time, like, Lee, you got to find things outside of your work that
but I don't want to.
Well, and that's what I told him. I was like, this is what I am. Like, I love this. Like I mentioned the article, I'm not writing that article for my job,
just
like my day-to-day job. I'm not getting paid for it. I'm writing it because I enjoy the process.
It's beautiful.
I enjoy doing it. And there is some selfishness. It's pretty cool to see people publish stuff with your name on it. And like, even at 41, you're like, hey, Mom, you want to put this on the fridge?
Yeah, you deserve that.
Yeah. It's super fun to do.
Yeah.
But that's part of like when I hear you say like, oh, this is a life's work. I'm a 4th degree black belt. It's not task oriented. This is a process that is
that's right.
The fabric of who you are. You obviously are incorporating this into your identity. And I think that's a lot of the difference too. In like, how do you become these masters or experts? Or
I think so. I mean, it kind of has to be who you are.
How does Messi become like the most phenomenal player? I mean, the genetics and LeBron. I don't know how big is LeBron, 6'8", 290 or something like that. But it's like there's that. Yeah. But
he also really enjoys it.
He really enjoys it. He likes going.
At least I hope so. That'd be really sad if he doesn't.
I mean, I guess Michael Jackson may be the,
yeah, that's true.
What was his dad's name?
His dad was making him do all that stuff. So this is normally when we'd sign off and talk about cool shit after we stop recording. But I've got a story I want to tell you, something that I experienced. And being who you are, I've told several people this story, and I just tell the story, and it's like they're like, "Well, that's weird," and then it's the end of the story. I want to see how you react to it. So, and if I did something throughout this story, if I did something where you were like, "Bro, that was really stupid," or like you were a dick, please tell me that because I want to learn from it. But one of the things I do is I teach kickboxing, and we had this guy come in, him and his mom, and I don't know how to explain him other than he probably would have benefited from working with you. Let's just put it that way.
Fair enough.
But he was, I would say, high level enough to do kickboxing. Yeah. He was missing an arm. He had one arm. Clearly something going on with the guy. But he was pretty nice, and his mom was pretty nice. And so I said, sure, because she said something athletic like this, and he likes to watch UFC and all this stuff. So I was like, all right, well, let's let him go. We'll let him hit the bags and stuff like that. So they did that for about a month, and then they disappeared.
Okay.
The guy's pretty nice. I feel like I was pretty nice to him. But then like 4 months later, I'm sitting in my office in my gym, working with someone, doing like a consultation, like a dieting consultation or whatever. And I can hear someone hitting the bags outside. And I'm like, what's going on? So I'm like, whatever, maybe it's a member or whatever. I'm like, no, that door's locked. I don't. Well, I had the front door open. Anyway, this is a complicated story. And I was like, let me just make sure. Let me look around the corner. I looked around the corner, and it was that dude. And I was like, he should not be here because this is like 11 o'clock in the morning. And And so I walked out and I'm like, hey, dude, how's it going? And he goes, my mom doesn't love me. And he's like hitting the bag super hard. And so I'm like, you should probably, like, to the person I was talking, I was like, you should probably get out of here. Like, why don't you just go ahead and go? And so I sit the guy down and I'm talking to him about like what's going on. And he's doing the thing where he's rocking and he's very upset. And I just let him tell me his story. He's telling me how his mom doesn't love him. And he's like, he can't be there anymore and all this stuff. And through questioning, I'm like, well, where you been? He's like, well, I've been sleeping on this bench over here. I'm like, okay. And he's like, but then I was in the hospital. I don't know. This is a complicated story. So I was like, okay, well, this is not going anywhere. So I look up his mom because when they signed up, I put her information in there. So I called her and she's like, yeah, screw that guy. I'm like, well, isn't that your son? Like, what's going on? She's like, she hung up on me. I was like, this is not going anywhere. This is why I'm telling you the story, because it's so surreal. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I call her back again. I called her back 3 or 4 times. She finally answered again. I was mad at that point. I was like, listen, bitch, like, what the fuck is going on? And she's like, well, he hits me and I don't really care what happens to him. He's supposed to be in the hospital. And I'm like, well, he's here now. And she's like, well, I don't care. Figure it out. And she hangs up on me again. I'm like, shit. So then I'm like, what the hell do I do? So I call a couple of friends. Like, my wife works for the state government and I know there's another member who I forget where they work, but they kind of do some of this work or whatever. And so I'm like, what? My wife's like, I don't know, and this other person's like, call the police. And I'm like, I don't want to call the police on the guy. Yeah. Like, he hasn't done anything to me. And so I call Richland and they're like, well, if he's trespassing, if you want to file a trespassing thing, we'll come pick him up. And I'm like, I don't want the guy to go to jail. Like, he's not doing anything. He's not trespassing. I don't want this to be like a thing. So then somebody calls me, one of these people call me back and they're like, well, get him back to the hospital. And they were like, but don't put him in your car. I'm like, well, how the fuck do I get him to the hospital? So anyway, I'm like, hey man, we gotta figure this out. So I'm like, I'll call an Uber.
All right.
So I call Uber.
On your account.
Yeah. So this is funny. I'm still blocked from Uber, by the way.
Because of this?
Yeah, I don't have it on my phone, but when you can't ride Uber anymore, it's red. You know how it's black, but the app turns red. Anyway, I'm still banned from Uber. So I call Uber.
Trying to be a nice guy.
This is right after COVID. This is like April, somewhere in there, so COVID's still kind of a thing, in terms of people not knowing what the hell to do. And so the Uber driver comes up and it's like, gotta wear a mask. And I'm like, all right, dude, you gotta put this mask on, gotta send you back to the place where you can be safe. Yeah. You gotta put the mask on. He's like, I'm not wearing no damn mask, whatever. And I'm like, oh shit. And as I'm like trying to hand him the mask and he's like, no, the Uber driver is like, just peels out. Like, he's like, I'm not getting this shit, not happening. And so I'm like, fuck. And so then I'm like, all right, so I'm going to call Uber again. I'm going to do another one. And the app's red. Like, the guy's already reported me that fast. Yeah. I'm like, shit, Uber doesn't work.
Damn.
Yeah. I'm like, So I'm like, all right, well, let's try Lyft. Well, then I called a yellow cab and they're like, well, it's going to be like 5 hours before we can get someone over there because it's Columbia and, we don't have cabs here. Yeah. So I do Lyft. And the Lyft driver drives up and he's like this, I can tell in the car, he's like 300 pounds. He's like 6'4", this giant black dude. Jeez. And he's like, I just walk over to him like, hey, here's the deal. And I tell him the whole story. I'm like, I can't get the mask on him. We got to get him. And he's like, put him in the back. So I put the guy in the back. I'm like, all right, dude, when you get to the hospital, you have to go in. Like, this is Rodney or whatever. I forget the guy's name. He's going to take care of you. Whatever. And so we get him in the lift and I get behind him in my car and I'm like, I'm going to follow them. Make sure. Yeah. Sure enough, the guy lets him out and he walks in the hospital. And I'm like, holy shit. And so then I called his mom back and I told her what happened. And I was like, by the way, you're a giant asshole, and hung up the phone on her. That's my story.
I would have done everything you did.
Thank you. God, that has bothered me.
I would not,
for 3 years.
I would not have changed one thing you did. I think everything you did was caring. You didn't leave the guy alone. I can't imagine how long it took.
It was like 6 hours.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I would have done nothing different.
People were calling me. I was like, I'm just going to talk to you tomorrow. Like, this is over.
Yeah. I think you did exactly what any
Man.
person who actually cared. I would have done nothing different.
That has bothered me so much.
Well, don't let me be the one.
No.
But
I'm literally looking for validation. It's my show. I could do what I want.
Absolutely.
No, I'm kidding.
I would say that there's a level of, to bring the conversation in completely full circle, empathy.
Okay. Well, I wasn't thinking that, but
you had to care. You spent 6 hours. The easiest solution would have been to call the police.
Yeah, just
instead
get him out of here.
Get him out of here. This is my private business. I don't want him here.
Yeah.
You can get the trespassing order. You can do all the paperwork you want, but you need to get him out of here. And if that requires whatever physical means you guys need to do, this ain't my problem.
I'd spent like a month or two with him in the classes, and I knew he was not. I was like, hey, he can do damage if he wants to. I can see he's a grown man. He's like 32 years old, which is what his mom was saying. Like, he's 32. Call the cops. Not my problem. I'm like, it kind of is your problem, but maybe it's not. I don't know how that works, but it sure as shit ain't my problem, you know.
But for 6 hours, you were willing
was my problem.
to
I couldn't sleep well at night if I'd have put that guy in jail or they'd have throw him on the ground or something. That's all I was thinking.
Yeah, and it could have very easily been what they did.
I'm pretty sure that's what would have happened.
Particularly if he started,
he would have freaked out immediately.
Belligerent or whatever word you want to use. The first Uber.
I felt like as soon as the cops came in the door, he would have wigged out.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, in the space that we work in, and a lot of the individuals we work with, that story.
That's how it ends.
Yeah, I've heard that story before.
Oh, wow.
That's not the first time I've heard someone recount that. It's not the first. I've sat and listened to the mother tell her version of that story.
Yeah.
Where she's coming home, I'm making some stereotypical judgments in this, but it sounds like you got an adult male with physical disabilities, probably some level of cognitive disabilities.
Yes.
Autism, perhaps,
sure.
Regardless of what it was.
Yeah.
That mother probably spent her entire life relying upon the school system to provide any level of service and needs that she required until he was 21. I think you said he was 32 or around.
Something like that. Yeah.
She probably spent the last 10 years having to care for this man.
Yeah.
There's really no service for him. He's someone that is got high enough functioning ability that he's not necessarily going to walk in and start ticking boxes.
Right.
So he falls into this outlier service area, and he's probably highly aggressive, highly impulsive. Think of the level of what the lack of impulse control it would take to walk into a business that you haven't been into in 4 years and just start using their stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Obviously, there's a disconnect there where something's not impeding that.
Well, I felt sort of, I don't know what word to use. Not proud, but I felt sort of like responsible because I knew the guy like trusted, like if he's out wandering Colombia, he knew that this place was, the people here were safe enough or whatever. And I felt sort of responsible after that point because like we created that environment for him and he was like, well, I'll go there, like,
and I'm sure I would assume that there was some level that in the process of training him for a month, the idea was if you're really frustrated or you're really upset,
you hit this bag.
Hit this.
That's
not your mom.
Exactly what.
So
I didn't know he was doing that kind of stuff. I still don't know, but that's the idea.
He's learning.
Yeah.
He's connecting the dots there of what you're teaching and what the idea was. And if his logic and his conceptualization of problem solving is basic enough that 4 months ago I saw Gene. Gene taught me that to do this when I'm upset,
I got to go there. And
I feel upset. I need to go do this.
Yeah,
it's very simple in its progression of logic. But
I mean,
I if that happened to me, I would feel the same way you did. And hell, I'm the guy that like walks dogs around the neighborhoods looking for their owners when they're running around. Like if a human walked in the door, I would do the exact same thing you did. But there's a lot of people that would have, when the mom hung up on them, the next call is City of Columbia. Get him out. I got a business to run. I got appointments that are coming in.
I got a meeting in an hour here. I can't.
I don't have time for this. And the problem would have been resolved for you. And who knows where that guy is now. And we could talk for another hour about how
well, I know you're passionate about it.
The provider system in South Carolina and in the United States and beyond doesn't support that family.
That's very clear from her. I mean, she was clearly just frustrated and scared.
And had probably been dealing with that similar issue for 32 years.
Dude, I can only imagine. I remember her coming in with him and just the exhaustion on her face. Yeah. And she would just sit in the back and like, I think she fell asleep one time, and it was just like, damn, this is.
Yeah. And
this is an escape for him and her. And I was like, I can't turn him away. I also realized I have zero experience. I probably have zero reason to accept a client like that in a kickboxing class. Like, but at the same time, it's like, do you just say, no, you can't come here? Yeah. I mean, because I had this debate with someone the day they came in and it was like, well, what do we do? Like, I don't feel like I can just say, no, we don't serve your kind here. That's not how that works.
No. And I think that it goes back to one of the other points we made where it's like, when I was talking about like the treatment overshadowing, how do we mold and change the model to be able to serve those people? Because I know a lot of people that I work with that would benefit from what you're talking about, because there's some level of behavior change that what you're talking about, changing people's response to their environment is behavior change.
Yeah.
And there are people that I work with every day that would absolutely unequivocally benefit from your training, your conceptualization of the environment. The problem is it's not tailored to their needs. It's not tailored to, if we spent 30 seconds Googling intellectual disabilities and martial arts, I know for a fact, even though I've never Googled it, there's a litany of options out there how it's, how do you get someone that's in a wheelchair to benefit from your thought process, your approach, your lens? Because it's not all, as we said, 80% of it has nothing to do with the physical part.
That's right.
So if they're in a wheelchair, that's not a barrier to them being able to access the overwhelming majority of what's beneficial for them.
Yep.
So I think that there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this isn't the right method for you, but I can find another one. And the thing is, you may not have the resources or the expertise to provide that to all of the people that walk through that may have some level of physical or
hell no.
But there are people that do.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that would be able to say, hey, this is what we do.
Yeah.
We have a class for special needs that meets once a week. We're able to provide this type of adaptive equipment. I'm making this up. We can pull up mats so it's easier for the wheelchairs to get in.
Right.
We could do all of these things. And I think that the fundamental dynamic when I talk to folks like yourself who don't necessarily walk in my world every day is this exact point, that we really can bend and mold and shave off and glue on pieces to make everything accessible to these people. Because I love the point of you saying like so much of what you do is not physical. It is, because that's what you're coming in and
it's the expression of it.
Exactly. Yeah. But I when I listen to you talk, it sounds like the change comes internally, and that has nothing to do with being able to stand up or necessarily understand the philosophical dynamics of it. And that's pretty cool. If you, to me, the idea that you could take something that, change it and make it accessible to somebody else. That, to me, that's cool. That's a really cool thing to do.
It is cool. I have no experience doing it.
Yeah.
Nor any probably valid reason to try it, but
absolutely.
Or to be trusted with trying it.
But recognizing just as from a human standpoint, hey, like this is possible. Like people can do this stuff. And, to me, there's a tremendous amount of insight into you, and you're just willing to go, man, I don't know what to do, but I know that I can't say no, and we're going to figure it out.
I wish I'd have known you then, man. You'd have been the first one I called.
And if he or someone else walks back in, Call me.
I will absolutely do that.
Call the cops too.
Well,
but I think that there's so much to unpack in that story.
Yeah.
But in the sense of you being able to sleep well tonight,
yeah,
I would have done the exact same thing you did.
that's very reassuring, man.
Every single thing, every single
That's
step
awesome.
of the way, I would have
Yeah.
done the exact same thing.
Probably call Lyft first next time.
Can you use Lyft? Are you able to get around
Lyft
town?
is fine. Uber, I still can't use Uber. I can.
What kind of like button did they press
I
that
know,
just like
I know.
totally ejected you?
Yeah. I could appeal. I've looked it up. There's an appeal process and stuff. I don't. Screw Uber.
Yeah.
You know. But that guy just looked and he was like, nope. He peeled out like with his tires. I was like, damn. Okay. In that moment, you're like, what's next? I guess he lives here now. I don't really know what happened.
What's that movie, Rudy, where the guy moves in and lives in like and starts training and
And then I called the yellow cab and they're like, oh, it's gonna be like 4 or 5 hours so we can get someone over there. And I'm like, really? I was like, you are a cab company, right? They're like, yeah, we only have a couple. I'm like, okay, wow. All right. Well, I guess that's not.
I can't think of the last
just
time
need a
I
cab.
saw a cab.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a problem.
I don't know where your studio is, but I can't. I don't know the last time I saw one.
Well, don't call them first. They would definitely not help you. Well, man, that's some really interesting things. I love the parallels.
I
was kind of sensing them when we were all the three of us in the last show were talking, and I appreciate your time, man.
I'm like I said earlier, I'm completely flattered by it, and I have several things that I want to go take deep dives into.
Me too. Me too.
And I look forward to talking to you a lot more.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
So thank you so much, and to your audience, I really appreciate it.